He did want very much to reunify the Union. But when you take a closer look at this metaphor, you might start to notice one telling and important problem. Put simply, Abraham Lincoln did not preside over the reunification of the United States. He was assassinated 5 days after the Civil War concluded. So yes, Lincoln did believe in a rhetoric of reunification. The video doesn't mention this, but he also proposed a 10% plan, whereby former Confederate states could rejoin the Union after only 10% of their male population swore loyalty to the US. But none of this can really add up to all that much because it was in no way politically actionable. Andrew Johnson, the president who took over after Lincoln was killed, was a former slave owner and white supremacist. He wanted an incredibly hasty Reconstruction plan whereby black people would be guaranteed no rights. And he was impeached by the Republican Congress. They overruled his vetoes and forged ahead in pursuing a much more ambitious, though ultimately short-lived, Reconstruction plan. We will never know what Abraham Lincoln would have done after the Civil War. I think it's one of the great tragedies of American history that we will never know that. But I can guarantee you this, that he, a genuine abolitionist and smart guy, would not have been as stupid as Andrew Johnson. Reconstruction, a real Reconstruction, was going to happen, had to happen. The Confederacy could not merely return when 10% of its men begrudgingly agreed to it, because that would have been disastrous and evil. A speech about the goodness of reunification can only go so far when a state that left the Union to own slaves needs to reintegrate into a union without slavery. So why do I care about this? What's the big deal? So what? PragerU narrowly zooms into the words of Abraham Lincoln without attending the political realities of his time. Well, I find it interesting because it speaks, I think, to a really deep element in PragerU's political philosophy. Recently, PragerU released the following tweet: "Compassionate societies are built on justice, not compassion." We know what PragerU means by this, right? At least from a general perspective. PragerU has always believed very deeply in retributive punishment and the death penalty and prison.
As strongly as I feel about any issue, I understand the opposition. But there is an exception: the death penalty for murder.
And here they're saying that for the world to be a good place where people care about each other, our society must pursue this kind of justice. But when you look at this Leo and Layla video, what we get is not a message of justice, but its opposite. There is no concept of how Southern society might have to change to grant subjecthood to its newly freed slaves, no concept of the wounds they created, and no idea of how to mend them. All Abe Lincoln has to say is, let the kids back into the chess club. We forgive and forget. Because if we don't, social division could get even worse. It is interesting that PragerU should say that a compassionate society can only be gotten through justice, because at the social level, from their perspective, there can be no justice, no claim made against its actions, no need for it to change. We can have justice for individuals, but for society, all we can have is a boundless and vacant compassion. And if you want to see an even more pronounced example of this, we have to look at the Leo and Layla video where they talk about Christopher Columbus. So there's a lot to say about this video. It engages in some of the most intense Columbus apologetics I've ever seen, going so far as to imply that Columbus was really nice to the Taino Indians, a group of people he quite literally enslaved.
The first people we met were great, the Taino. They were peaceful, curious, and really helpful. I could tell right away that they were highly intelligent. They even were able to quickly mimic everything we said to them. I ordered my men to treat them well.
But ultimately, I think the best way to approach this video is to zoom in on two of its most interesting moments. The first happens in the introduction of the video. As Leo and Layla discuss the controversial role of Columbus in modern American discourse, they say this.
The side against Columbus says he was a really mean guy who spread slavery, disease, and violence to people who would have been better off if he'd never gone to the New World.
Ouch.
I know, but the side for him says he was a really courageous guy who loved exploring, inspired generations, and spread Christianity and Western civilization to people who really benefited from new ways of thinking and doing things.
That sounds really good.
If you want to understand why I'm so interested in the children's content of PragerU, I think this moment does a good job of explaining it. In some ways, Leo and Layla is more gentle than other aspects of PragerU. It is less explicitly political, it expresses a more kindly attitude, etc. But in other ways, it goes much, much farther. A few years ago, Mike Knowles, a genocidal fascist in his own right, made a mainline PragerU video about Columbus. The basic idea of the video is this vague gesture that while Columbus did not treat the Indians he met well, we still ought to celebrate him because he's responsible for America, the civilization that we live in.
Columbus was not blameless. He sold natives into slavery. But the explorer did not invent slavery.
I find this line of reasoning self-serving and ridiculous, but we also ought to note that it's far less radical than the position Leo and Layla just advocated. No, this cartoon says, Columbus did not merely do a bad thing that we shouldn't care about because America is so good. Rather, there is an important sense that his actions were actually benign, that in fact he did a favor to indigenous populations by civilizing them and introducing them to Christianity.
And spread Christianity and Western civilization to people who really benefited.
Because the audience of these videos is young children, because children are impressionable and politically illiterate, PragerU is willing to proudly stand by parts of its political project that it would otherwise often work to hide.
Lying, murder, war, it all exists in the land I just found too. In Europe we draw the line at things like eating people and human sacrifice.
That even with his enslavement and slaughtering of indigenous populations, we might reasonably call his and his culture's impact on the lives of Indians a positive one. Here, in this video, we find the foundations of supremacist thinking before the innuendo and the lies and the supposed nuance sets in. And I think it's important to look at that. And the second moment I want to look at in this video comes toward the end. As Leo confronts Columbus about his slaving, they have this interaction.
Slavery is as old as time and has taken place in every corner of the world, even amongst the people I just left. Being taken as a slave is better than being killed, no? I don't see the problem.
Well, in our time, we view slavery as being evil and terrible.
Magnifico! That's wonderful! I am glad humanity has reached such a time. But you said you're from 500 years in the future? How can you come here to the 15th century and judge me by your standards from the 21st century?
So, I find this scene just absolutely fascinating. To start off, it's so incredibly odd, just from a storytelling perspective. Columbus, within the narrative of this cartoon, is not some abstract creature from 500 years ago. No, he's literally a human being, and here, he stands on a slave ship and talks about what a hero he is. Within that context, how is the sentence, "How dare you judge me, you're from the future," even makes sense? What is it supposed to mean? Does Columbus think it's wrong to own slaves, or doesn't he? Are Leo and Layla upset at his actions, or aren't they? It all just feels so wrong and uncomfortable. And I think this feeling of discomfort ties into a deeper observation about this cartoon and about PragerU's ideology. See, the prevailing concept that people have of the left and right is that the right believes in universal moral principles and the left does not. PragerU itself has videos about this, talking about the importance of God and morality and the moral relativism of the secular left.
That if there is no God, there is no objective morality.
But the reality is quite the opposite, I think. The mission of leftism, of the emancipation of people, the alleviating of oppression and injustice, fundamentally centers around some concept of universal moral principles. We know that slavery and murder and deprivation is wrong because the victims of these crimes are people and therefore worthy of the same dignity and moral consideration as anyone else. This is a kind of universal thinking that PragerU could never advocate, though, because at the center of its conservative political philosophy is a belief in inequality and hierarchy, a belief that some people are simply better and more worthy than are others. And so, PragerU contorts itself, develops this strange mutant morality.
Some things are clearly bad, no matter when they happen. But for other things, before you judge, you must ask yourself, what did the culture and society at the time treat as no big deal?
Some crimes are always bad, Columbus says, but slavery isn't one of them. We should still celebrate slavers. The people complaining about the celebration of slavers are ridiculous. There are universal moral wit. A kind of Steven Crowder wannabe claims that the left and BLM often misconstrue the words of MLK, and then later on he says this, just a bold-faced lie.
Black Lives Matter loves affirmative action and diversity standards, whereas MLK believed that you should judge someone based off their character, not their skin color. When you push affirmative action, giving people advantages or disadvantages just because of the color of their skin, you are not following what MLK believed in.
King did believe in what we'd now call affirmative action, saying that black people deserve special compensatory measures and that a society that has done something special against the Negro for hundreds of years must now do something special for him. The obvious goal here is to render MLK a meaningless figure who doesn't threaten or want to change the status quo of American racial politics. PragerU does something very similar in another video, Where Are You, Martin Luther King? In it, Jason Riley looks at a few times that King instructed black Americans to think about their own responsibilities and uses this to conclude that caring about racism today, thinking that it exists and is important, is against the message that MLK advocated for, which is, of course, ridiculous. But this video, the Leo and Layla one, it's not like that. Layla stood up for a student who was being bullied for her disability, and they go back in time and talk to MLK, and he stresses the importance of standing up for people, of helping the marginalized in society, and then that's it. The video ends.
Whether an injustice affects just a handful of people or millions, this world needs brave people like yourself to act peacefully and stand up against them.
This is all completely fine. It's almost good, and so the question on the table is obvious. What do we do with this video? What sense, if any, should we make of it? So when I think about this question, I can't help but be reminded of the 1938 Leni Riefenstahl film, Olympia. So let me talk about that for a surprisingly long time. Olympia is a film documenting the 1936 Berlin Olympic Games. The film was, of course, made under Nazi Germany, funded and distributed by the propaganda arm of the Third Reich. And here's the thing, on first pass, it's a really straightforward film. Olympia is about the Olympics. It shows people throwing javelins. It celebrates different athletes, different nations. And if I didn't know what Hitler looked like, the man they keep cutting back to, I wouldn't honestly think much about the movie at all. But if we want to understand Olympia in its context, if we want to be able to conceptualize this film as a part of the Nazi project, we have to engage in a different way. In the absence of weird stuff, explicitly Nazi stuff, we have to look at the parts of the film that seem normal. The first moments of Olympia are some of its best and most interesting. We begin the film looking at a number of Greek statues, and then they come alive. We see a number of naked dancers and athletes. We see a discus thrower evoking Myron's famous statue. Then we watch a German runner lighting the Olympic flame, tying the 1936 games back to antiquity and suggesting a kind of historical continuity. None of this is odd, right? The Olympics do come from ancient Greece, and the Olympic Games often remind us of this fact. But here's the thing, it's different when Nazis do it. Adolf Hitler and the Nazi regime was obsessed with ancient Greece and Rome. In its quest to understand the German identity as historically supreme, they tied the nation to antiquity. Hitler wrote in Mein Kampf of a racial unity between the Germans, the Greeks, and the Romans. Nazi scholars embraced the idea that, in fact, ancient Greeks were a Nordic people, that they shared a common bloodline with modern Germans, a bloodline that was now under threat by the verminous Jewish race. And this idea was broadly disseminated by the Nazi state through publicity campaigns and architecture and education and radio broadcasts. Adolf Hitler personally oversaw the purchase of the discus thrower statue for 5 million Reichsmarks. And of course, you can see this in Olympia, the desire to tie the German people to the epic history of ancient Greece, to embody with German flesh the ideal of Greek sculpture. The 1936 Olympics were the first time the Olympic torch was brought to a host city. Joseph Goebbels loved the idea, and it was done to perform this kind of connection between the ancient world and the Third Reich. The body of the movie itself, well, it's a depiction of the Olympics. Obviously, the film serves as propaganda in the way the Olympics always do. It shows German power and industry and wealth and artistic prowess to the world. But the games themselves, they feel normal. Jesse Owens, the black American athlete who dominated his races, is treated with the same kind of valor that anyone else is. But even here, I think it makes sense to interrogate what's going on a little bit. The Olympics can easily be appropriated as a celebration of racial difference and nationalism. It is, after all, an area where ethnicity is contested and performed and made physical. As two black athletes sweep up in their race, we can hear the announcer telling us the stakes of this battle.
Zwei schwarze Läufer gegen die stärksten der weißen Rasse.
Who will win? Who is better here, the white race or the black? This is not to say that the Olympics are inherently Nazi-esque, but that the logic of the Olympics can dovetail quite nicely with that of the Nazis. That the background customs of our culture can be used to serve heinous ideological ends. So, Olympia is not propaganda because it does disgusting things, advances the worst aspects of Nazi ideology. No, it's propaganda because it does things, communicates things that benefit the Third Reich. Okay, let's take a step back from Olympia and ask a question. Can we perform this same kind of exercise on the Leo and Layla video about MLK? And the answer is, yeah, we can. For example, we can point out that MLK is never allowed to present a solution. Like, he talks about how even after the Civil Rights and Voting Rights Act, there's still more work that needs to be done.
Since you got those laws passed, why do you still need to be out here giving speeches?
Because in the years since, I've learned that there is much work that still needs to be done. There is far more injustice in the world than I once even realized.
But what work? What needs to be done? What is the nature of this racism, and how do we fix it? Looking at the way we generally teach King to children, this isn't strange at all. Most of the celebration surrounding him for kids is oriented around his I Have a Dream speech.
Oh, tell us about the I Have a Dream speech.
And that speech, while beautiful and important, doesn't tell us specific actions to take to make those dreams reality. Rather, it is unifying and general and personal. But when PragerU eliminates discussion of MLK's politics, it's different. It's different because they hate his politics, his anti-capitalism, his belief in redistribution and reparations. Society at large ignores King's beliefs, and PragerU uses this fact to hide their disdain for him. Or we could look at the framing device for the episode. Layla stood up for a disabled kid, went to Martin Luther King, and talked about standing up for people. Then she goes back to her time, and the problem with that disabled kid is solved.
And all my friends said they were sorry to Haley, and asked her if they can help with a fundraiser. We start this weekend.
All right!
The bullies simply realize their error and change. In one notable line, Leia mentions that they're even building a wider hallway in the school that wheelchair users can access.
We're gonna lead a fundraiser that will add space to the areas of the school where it's a tough fit for Haley's wheelchair.
That's kind of odd, right? Like, from Leia's perspective, everything here works out so easily. She stands up to the bullies, and the bullies stop bullying, and they all decide to make an important structural change to the school's treatment of disabled people. This kind of story, while not on its face offensive, is perfectly tuned to the narrative that PragerU wants to tell. In the video, there is no mention of racism in our current society, no stated end to MLK's story, and that makes sense. PragerU wants us to believe that King broadly solved racism, solved it in the way that Leia solved ableism. PragerU uses King quite literally to deflect from any claim of current racial injustice, so it's only reasonable that they tell a story where injustice is quite easy to solve. You might have an issue with the sort of analysis I'm doing here. Look, you might think, you can talk about the importance of context all you want, but really, none of this matters that much. It's not all that offensive to talk about what King said and did without thinking about his politics. It happens all the time. And it's certainly not offensive to use King as a positive role model who stood up to injustice. At the end of the day, you comment, you're just finding problems where they don't exist. And I gotta admit, you have a point. That is kind of what I'm doing. But the problem is, I think that you, this hypothetical person in my audience, are going about this process of analysis in the wrong way. It's tempting when we look at bad conservative propaganda to look for issues, things to take offense at. God knows I do that all the time. But in some cases, that mode of thinking is just not all that helpful. The question that we need to ask is not, is this Leo and Layla video problematic? No, the question here, very similar to the question we asked of Olympia, is does this work do something that benefits the project of PragerU? Does it communicate something PragerU wants to communicate? And the answer is yes. Sure, this Leo and Layla video could have been evil in the way their other MLK videos are evil. It could have lied about the man's politics, claimed that we betrayed the message of King, whined about how we still talk about racism in 2023. But that, I think, would have been counterproductive. Invited into this video a dissenting opinion, told the audience that some people disagree with their conclusions about justice and oppression and MLK. This is a video for children. They don't need to prove their point or argue with the opposition. All they need to do is produce a version of Martin Luther King that does not confront conservative ideology, that does not challenge the lies that PragerU tells about him. And so, they produced it. Okay, I want to talk now about two videos on the PragerU Kids channel called How to Embrace Your Femininity and How to Embrace Your Masculinity. Notably, these are not Leo and Layla cartoons, but instead live-action listicles with a BuzzFeed energy. So, on first pass, these videos are quite predictable. For boys, they say to be strong.
It means becoming a strong person.
Be financially independent, have integrity, etc. For girls, they say a lot of misogynistic nonsense. Smile more, make a beautiful home, try not to get the wrong kind of attention from men, don't be aggressive, and so on.
One of the most beautiful things God has created is a woman's smile.
But there's one thing in these videos that just caught me off guard, and it's the first tip that PragerU gives in their femininity video.
Don't get caught up in stereotypes. In today's age, it's a big question what a woman should look like, or what a woman even is for that matter. And people are running away from gender stereotypes as far as possible.
Don't worry too much about stereotypes, they say. If you want to wear pink or wear high heels or, and here's an idea, be a housewife and mom, you should do that.
Embrace the idea of being a wife or a mother.
Now, looking at this clip, we can of course point to the naked dishonesty of what PragerU is doing here. They say to not care about stereotypes, but within the actual video, they only mean don't care about not embracing stereotypes. It's actually really cool and epic to be a traditional woman. In other words, they want women to care about stereotypes. They're obviously directing them to fill a conservative social role, and everything else is just equivocal fluff. But that's the thing, right? That's what catches me off guard. Why is PragerU, this extremely conservative YouTube channel, equivocating? Why do they feel uncomfortable just saying outright that being feminine is good and that what femininity means is being a wife and mother? Why are they treating this issue with such unusual restraint? Well, I think that's for two reasons, and they both kind of fascinate me. The first is, I just enjoy moments where PragerU implicitly acknowledges that its politics are awful and that nobody actually likes them. For boys, all their advice is extremely affirmative. They give a series of uncomplicated things a man should be and leave it at that. This is because the position they give men in society is gratifying and sounds nice. Masculinity to them is about having power.
Be independent, financially and mentally.
But for girls, it has to be different. Their role is to be subjugated by power, to be docile and passive and run a home and make it pretty.
Make your house a home, and along the way, stay grateful and encouraging.
This is horrible. It goes directly against basic social ideals like fairness and equality, and does so in a way that most people would find appalling. So, when it comes time to describe femininity, they have to approach it differently. We're not telling you that women belong in the kitchen, we're telling you you should be in the kitchen if you want to be. It's really your choice.
So don't let anyone tell you it's bad to fit stereotypes. Those people are just trying too hard to be cool. No.
It's really just vapid waffling that sells their obvious misogyny without having to name it, and I find that kind of funny to watch. The second reason I find this moment interesting is that it is, on its face, gibberish. The video is called How to Embrace Femininity. Its purpose is to tell girls what to do, how to live up to a feminine ideal. But the advice, don't care about stereotypes, does no such thing. To not care about stereotypes provides girls no guidance on how to be or what attitudes they should have. It cannot be feminine to simply do whatever you want, because femininity must describe a way women should be in order to be a socially actionable concept. But see, I think that's kind of the point. Women must be subjugated. They should be raised in repressive, conservative environments, educated to be chaste and virginal, provided fewer job opportunities, told they should only live for their husbands and children, given no access to their reproductive organs, etc. But all this must, at every moment, appear natural. Don't worry about gender roles. Don't concern yourself with what society wants you to be. If you simply lean into your own womanly instincts, your service to men will come about organically. For the project of authoritarianism to be complete, it must be understood, ultimately, as the only way things could have ever been. And so, the paradoxical statement comes to make sense. To embrace femininity is to pretend that it does.
Optimal simulation.
Yeah, internet is.
Understanding reality in such a situation is a very convoluted matter. Researching the depths of cosmology and the origins of our universe leads us into a realm of profound mystery and ongoing scientific inquiry. The new images captured by the James Webb Space Telescope have reignited discussions about the very fabric of our world, testing established theories and provoking scientists to reconsider fundamental aspects of cosmological understanding. At the heart of this inquiry lies the theory of how things came to be, a foundation of current cosmology. According to this theory, around 13.8 billion years ago, the universe emerged from an extraordinarily dense and hot state, expanding rapidly and resulting in space-time and matter as we understand it today. This cosmic event is not simply an explosion within pre-existing space.
That sucks. I was
Rather,
hanging
it may
out
encompass
with
the very
the
origin of space itself.
Onion.
The notion of
We
a
were all
singularity,
doing Leap of Faith.
where gravitational forces are so intense that space-time becomes infinite, supports our understanding of this primordial epic. However, the discovery of early galaxies by the James Webb Telescope challenges our assumptions about how quickly structures formed in the universe's infancy. These galaxies, identified within a few hundred million years of the Big Bang, appear remarkably evolved and massive, contrary to assumptions based on current cosmological models. One of the significant questions raised by these discoveries is the nature of cosmic expansion. According to the prevailing theory, expansion occurred within fractions of a second after the Big Bang, causing the universe to grow exponentially. This rapid expansion would explain the uniformity of the cosmic microwave background radiation observed across the universe today. However, the new discoveries suggest complexities in the early universe's development that may necessitate adjustments to inflationary models. The formation of galaxies like those seen by the James Webb Telescope prompts cosmologists to reevaluate the conditions and processes governing the universe's early development. These galaxies, now significant in size and mass soon after the Big Bang, imply a density of matter that exceeds previous estimates. The mystery deepens when considering how such massive structures could form and evolve in a relatively short cosmic time frame. Furthermore, the discovery of these early galaxies raises intriguing questions about the nature of dark matter and dark energy, two elusive components that constitute the majority of the universe's mass and energy content. While dark matter is believed to provide the gravitational scaffolding essential for galaxy formation, the distribution and properties of dark matter in the early universe remain uncertain. In line with these astrophysical mysteries, theoretical physicists are exploring alternative cosmological models that challenge the conventional Big Bang perspective. Some theories propose that our universe is merely one among many in a vast multiverse, each with its own unique physical laws and constants. These ideas, arising from advancements in string theory and quantum cosmology, suggest a more complex and interconnected universe than previously imagined. One idea gaining traction is eternal inflation, wherein universes continually emerge from a larger expanding space. This hypothesis posits that our universe could be just one bubble among countless others, each with its own distinct properties. The challenge lies in finding observational evidence to support such theoretical notions as they push the boundaries of empirical verification. Another provocative hypothesis is that our universe exists within a simulated reality, akin to a computer-generated game. This idea draws parallels to advancements in artificial intelligence and computational science, where simulations can replicate complex systems with astonishing fidelity. If true, our perception of reality as a singular physical universe could be fundamentally altered, raising significant philosophical and scientific questions about the nature of existence. Moreover, advancements in observational cosmology continue to reveal the universe's vastness and intricacy. Telescopes like the James Webb Space Telescope, with its remarkable sensitivity and resolution, promise to unveil even more secrets of the universe. Future observations may shed light on the earliest moments of the universe, providing insights into its ultimate fate and the underlying rules that govern its evolution. Beyond observational cosmology, particle physicists are investigating the fundamental particles and forces that shape the universe. The mission to unify gravity with the other three fundamental forces, electromagnetism, strong nuclear force, and weak nuclear force, remains a central goal of theoretical physics. Concepts like quantum gravity and string theory offer potential frameworks for understanding these fundamental interactions at both the smallest and largest scales of the universe. In the realm of quantum mechanics, the concept of time itself remains a topic of intense debate. The idea of time as a linear progression from past to future is challenged by quantum theories suggesting that time may be emergent or even elusive at the fundamental level. Understanding the nature of time within the context of cosmological models could reshape our perception of the universe's origins and evolution. Furthermore, the quest for extraterrestrial life continues to captivate public imagination and drive scientific inquiry. The discovery of exoplanets, planets orbiting stars
You're
beyond
training
our
the
solar
bot.
system, has expanded our understanding of planetary diversity and the potential for habitable conditions elsewhere in the universe. Future missions, such as the James Webb Space
No, like, what
Telescope's
is it?
investigation of
It's a
exoplanet
cucumber.
atmospheres, may
No.
provide evidence of biosignatures indicative of life beyond Earth. In addition to these scientific endeavors, social and philosophical reflections on the universe enrich our understanding of our place within it. Questions about the meaning of existence, the possibility of intelligent life elsewhere, and humanity's future in space exploration inspire thought and discussion across disciplines. As we stand on the brink of a new era in astronomy and cosmology, fueled by technological advancements and theoretical breakthroughs, we are reminded of the profound interconnectedness of everything, from the smallest subatomic particles to the vast cosmic structures spanning billions of light years. The universe reveals its secrets to those willing to explore and question. In conclusion, the exploration of the universe and the origins of existence is a journey that transcends disciplinary boundaries and challenges our most fundamental assumptions about reality. The discoveries made by instruments like the James Webb Space Telescope offer tantalizing glimpses into the early universe and provoke new inquiries regarding evolution and development. As we continue to unravel the mysteries of dark matter, dark energy, and cosmic expansion, we draw closer to a broader understanding of the universe and our place within it. Through collaboration among cosmologists, physicists, philosophers, and technologists, we embark on a grand journey to interpret the universe, a mission that promises to redefine our understanding of existence itself. Whether exploring the depths of black holes, charting the trajectories of distant galaxies, or investigating the nature of reality, every revelation brings us closer to unraveling the intricate tapestry of the universe. As we venture deeper into the cosmos, guided by curiosity and driven by a desire to grasp the universe's vastness and complexity, we are reminded of Carl Sagan's words, "Somewhere, something incredible is waiting to be known." This sentiment encapsulates the essence of scientific exploration, a continuous journey of discovery, wonder, and enlightenment that continues to inspire generations of scientists and thinkers alike. In the words of Albert Einstein, the most beautiful thing we can experience is the mysterious. It is the source of all true art and science. As we confront the mysteries of the universe, we are invited to embrace uncertainty, challenge our assumptions, and seek new perspectives that expand our understanding of the universe and ourselves. Thus, the exploration of the universe is not only a scientific endeavor but a profound human quest for knowledge and meaning, an odyssey that transcends the boundaries of space and time, inviting us to ponder our place in the grand tapestry of existence.
100 trillion years from now, the last of a great civilization hides in the darkness. Throughout their glory days, their engineers worked entire star systems. They dismantled planets and asteroids to construct an immense interstellar empire. But now, in the twilight of their time, all of this is long gone. All around them, the universe is dying as the last of the stars are going out. Over countless millennia, the sky has continued to fade into an eternal night, the aging universe gripped by desolation and decay. And so, in the darkness, they wait for the end. Long before they had realized it was coming, they knew that the universe was on a path of inevitable decline. Methodically, they hunted for a final place to wait out eternity, and embarked on their last great feat of engineering. Around a lost and lonely black hole, they built a new home. With demolished worlds as raw materials, they constructed a shell to completely enclose the darkness, and within this thin shell, barely withstanding the gravitational grip of their savior, they eked out their meager lives. The dwindling light of dying stars rained down upon their final home, whilst their swirling black hole was harvested to power their existence. But more than that, the black hole at their heart gave them the greatest gift of all. For the black hole gave them time. No one remembered the name of the great scientist who had discovered the nature of time. But the astro engineers knew that time was not the same across the cosmos. And here, within the immense gravity of the black hole, time trickled more slowly. Whilst many years passed outside, mere moments flashed by within the immense sphere. And so the last of the civilization watched the future play out in front of them. But they knew they had only delayed, not averted, their ultimate demise. And the darkness would inevitably envelop them forever. Of course, this story is little more than speculation, but it is built on a scientific idea that changed our universe. It's been more than a century since Einstein's relativity shook up our understanding of time and space. But how does it really work? And what does it really mean? Both time and space seem so commonplace, so obvious, so everyday. But beneath their ubiquity, they hide a multitude of unanswered questions. Questions to which Einstein's theories only begin to answer. What is space made of? Does time exist? And will hunting for their ultimate nature lead to sudden clarity? Or will space and time just become more elusive? Einstein offered them lunch, and they accepted. So he moved a whole bunch of papers from the table, opened 4 cans of beans with a can opener, heated them, stuck a spoon in each, and that was our lunch. Albert Einstein was a busy man and often missed lunch, and that was back in 1915. In the century since, our lives have only become more chaotic. And that is why a meal kit service like HelloFresh, our sponsors today, are such a great choice. HelloFresh delivers fresh, high-quality produce straight from the farm to your door with more than 55 weekly meal options. Great for everyone, and especially if you want to stay fit and healthy. I'm a big fan of fitness and eating the right food, but in honesty, sometimes there just aren't enough hours in the day, and a microwavable meal seems like the only option. HelloFresh has saved me from this tasteless horror. The kits are foolproof, genuinely really hard to get wrong, and that is coming from an absolute cooking disaster. And last, but definitely not least, a recent survey found their meals up to 72% cheaper than dining out or grocery shopping. Go to HelloFresh.com and use the code HISTORY16 for up to 16 free meals and 3 surprise gifts. This is a great company, and the cherry on top is that they're also carbon neutral. A big thanks to HelloFresh for supporting educational content on YouTube. As the lonely world lingered on, its beating heart warped the very fabric of the universe around it. The civilization had done everything they could to keep going, to put off the inevitable. But try as they might, they could only bend reality. They could not break it. Behind it all is surely an idea so simple, so beautiful, that when we grasp it, in a decade, a century, or a millennium, we will all say to each other, how could it have been otherwise? How could we have been so stupid? What is space? The question seems almost meaningless. As children, we learn to describe our surroundings as up, down, left, right, back, and front. We call it three-dimensional and are free to explore each dimension. But just what is it, this universal platform on which we play out our lives? It is a question that occupied the minds of the earliest philosophers. In the 4th century BC, Plato declared that space was the nurse of becoming, a medium in which everything existed but with no qualities of its own, and his student Aristotle agreed that an empty void was impossible. But it would be more than 2,000 years before our concept of space was born. By the coming of the 17th century, modern science was crystallizing. The processes of the universe were being codified into physical laws, and the understanding of these physical laws was evolving from myths and stories to the language of mathematics. Of course, Isaac Newton was at the forefront of this revolution, but before he enters our stage, we must first start with the boat. In 1632, Galileo published his seminal work, Dialogue Concerning the Two Chief World Systems. He was in his mid-60s by this point, and had already had multiple run-ins with the Roman Inquisition for his assertions that the Earth rotated around the Sun. So, he had decided to skirt controversy and spend the intervening years quietly cementing his myriad ideas on space and the cosmos into a book. And at one point within this book, he muses
Something on
on
your
a
mind
boat.
again? Let's work through it together.
More specifically, the life of a sailor locked below deck in a windowless cabin, with plates, knives, and a goldfish in a bowl on the table, and a collection of birds, flies, and butterflies. Just what does the sailor experience? Tied up in port, the cabin is a picture of serenity. All is calm as the goldfish swims happily in his bowl. On the table, plates and cutlery remain in their place, and the flying creatures happily flutter about. But finding itself in rough seas, the cabin heaves and falls with the ship. Plates and cutlery are wrenched off the table, water spills from the goldfish bowl. On calm seas with wind-filled sails, the ship would speed up. The sailor would feel this change and see things sliding off the table. But when the wind finally drops, the ship sails smoothly on the glassy sea. Inside the cabin, all would be calm, serenity returning. For the sailor, it would be as if the ship was still in port and was not moving at all. A dropped plate would fall straight to the floor, and the sailor would sit comfortably in their chair. And it was here Galileo realized something. Without a window to reveal the truth, there are no experiments the sailor could do to reveal whether the ship was moving or not. He concluded, therefore, that there must be no absolute concept of being at rest in space. Instead, everyone must experience any smooth, uniform motion in the same way. All uniform motion must feel like simply being still. Galileo declared that any uniform motion is simply relative to any other uniform motion. And with this, the first theory of relativity had been born. Galileo's sailor floats gently on their ship on seas near the Earth's equator, rotating at 1,600 kilometers an hour around the Earth, which in turn orbits the Sun at 67,000 kilometers an hour, which in turn orbits the Milky Way at 720,000 kilometers an hour, which in turn is traveling towards the Andromeda Galaxy at 403,000 kilometers an hour. And yet, he feels nothing on this vast journey, millions of kilometers from his starting point. Unfortunately, upon publishing the book, Galileo once again fell foul of the Church and was found guilty of heresy for his heliocentric view of the cosmos. The work was banned and would not be removed from the Church's Index of Forbidden Books until 1835. But this was not the end. For within a few decades of Galileo's downfall, two of Europe's greatest minds were arguing about the nature of space. One of them, Isaac Newton, was born in England in 1642 within a year of Galileo's death. He, of course, needs little introduction and is known now as one of the greatest thinkers of his age, perhaps one of the greatest of all time. And whilst not forgotten, his opponent, Gottfried Leibniz, is somewhat less well known today. Born in 1646 in what is present-day Germany, he was a leading thinker of his time, writing on mathematics and philosophy. He pondered deep metaphysical questions, including one that still haunts physicists and philosophers to this day: why there is something rather than nothing. It was in the development of calculus that the two men's feud began. Whilst Leibniz published his work first, Newton claimed that he had stolen his ideas. As president of the Royal Society at the time, Newton set up a committee to investigate the dispute. Unsurprisingly, the committee found in favor of Newton. And so, this animosity carried over to their second disagreement. a simple question. What happens to a spinning bucket of water? Space, Newton declared, was a universal absolute, a rigid stage on which motion was played out, and both space and time would exist in a universe devoid of matter to experience any motion. To argue his point, Newton asked us to think about a bucket of water. If the bucket sits at rest, the surface of the water would be flat and level. But if we spin the bucket, the water spins too, and its surface becomes curved. And so Newton asked, just what is the water spinning with respect to? He claimed that the acceleration of the spin was relative to an absolute space, something separate to the object itself. And so spinning a bucket in an empty universe would also curve the surface of the water. But to Leibniz, space in an empty universe, devoid of any matter, simply made no sense. The properties of objects, Leibniz claimed, are essential in defining their meaning. Space only had meaning in the relative locations of objects, and similarly, time only had meaning when discussing their relative motions. Without matter, Leibniz said, space and time simply had no role, and hence, no existence. Sadly, Leibniz died in 1716, with the argument still in full swing, and it was Newton's ideas that stuck. Absolute space, in its own nature, without relation to anything external, remains always similar and immovable. Absolute, true, and mathematical time, of itself and from its own nature, flows equally without relation to anything external. This so-called absolute space and time would be the accepted science for nearly 2 centuries, but with the caveat of Galileo's rejection of absolute rest. Relativity was still part of the argument. But that only applied to space. Time was a totally different matter. With its implicit direction, time appeared completely distinct. For Newton and Galileo, everyone's clock across the universe ticked with absolute synchronicity, a universal beat that ran through every event in the cosmos. 1 second on Earth, the same as a second anywhere else. But is this true? Is time malleable, or an unswerving metronome that drags the cosmos forward? Does time itself have properties, or is it defined only by the events that run in its current? To answer these questions, we must begin not with physicists wondering about clocks, rulers, and motion, but with heat. In the distant future universe, around the aging black hole, our dying civilization sits and waits. For sitting and waiting is all they can do. With the passing of the stars, raw energy had become the most precious thing. To preserve what they had slowed their very existence. Every aspect was focused upon survival as their sleepy eyes watched the ever-darkening skies. And as total, universal heat death crept across the cosmos, they realized that time was their ultimate enemy. You may see a cup of tea fall off a table and break into pieces on the floor, but you will never see the cup gather itself back together and jump back on the table. What is time? Like space, the nature of time occupied the minds of many ancient thinkers. In ancient Greece, Aristotle stated that time was simply the steps between before and after, whilst Hindu philosophers saw time as cyclical, from creation to destruction, over 4 billion years. But its true origin remained elusive. Like space, time seems to be something obvious, something that is just present. But it is clearly a different beast. We cannot, for example, freely travel through time. Unlike space, time has a direction, a distinct past, and a coming future. Of course, scientists can be pragmatic and not worry about the nature of time. Coupled with a ruler, a clock completes the experimenter's toolbox. But it doesn't mean we can ignore the question. And so to understand time fully, we first have to think about horses and steam engines. The coming of the Industrial Revolution presented humanity with a problem. The original engines of civilization, draft animals like horses and cattle, were relatively simple things. Understanding how much to feed them and how much to work them was easy. A certain number of bales of hay could guarantee a day's work from a well-fed animal. But what of newfangled machines, such as a steam engine? How much work can you get out of a heap of coal? This was an important question from an economic standpoint. Do you even bother to replace a horse with an engine if it is going to cost more to feed it? And it was out of this conundrum that thermodynamics was born. Many minds were wrestling over the question of the ultimate efficiency of engines. Indeed, at the time of thermodynamics' inception, a typical engine only worked at 3% efficiency. In a physical steam engine, the heat of the fire is used to boil water, but some of the fire's heat just radiates into the air. Metal scrapes against metal, screeching loud and hot to the touch, both forms of energy loss. In any physical steam engine, this loss of heat as waste is inevitable. And indeed, within the mathematics of thermodynamics, perfect efficiency was found to be an illusion. The concentrated energy released from burning coal must be degraded as it flows through the engine, and some must be lost into the surroundings. Eventually, a new measure was introduced to account for this increase of decay and disorder: entropy. And it is probability that dictates how this happens. As the early 20th century physicist George Gamow put it, the room in which you sit reading this book is filled uniformly by air, from wall to wall and from floor to ceiling. And it never even occurs to you that the air in the room can unexpectedly collect itself in a far corner, leaving you to suffocate in your chair. However, this horrifying event is not at all physically impossible, but only highly improbable. Gamow goes on to give the waiting time of such an event: trillions upon trillions of times longer than the entire age of the universe. Disorder is always, statistically, far more likely. And so, through these new laws of thermodynamics, physicists revealed an inexorable growth in entropy as the universe marches on, a future universe destined to be more disordered and decayed than today's. And this applied not only to steam engines, but whole planets, stars, galaxies, filaments, all marching from order to disorder. It was in 1862 that the grim logical endpoint of these ideas was proposed by Lord Kelvin, for whom the measurement unit was named. Although mechanical energy is indestructible, there is a universal tendency to its dissipation, which produces exhaustion of potential energy through the material universe. The result would inevitably be a state of universal rest and death if the universe were finite and left to obey existing laws. And so, was this time? A constantly dying universe heading for inevitable heat death? Stars going out one by one in a steady march from potential energy to waste, leaving the trillion-year-old universe dark and spent? One of the great minds to occupy himself with entropy and the arrow of time was James Clerk Maxwell, the iconic Scottish 19th century scientist. His views on thermodynamics shaped our understanding of heat and gases, and he did all of this with the assistance of a demon. Maxwell understood the implications of entropy. He knew that if he mixed two gases, one hot and one cold, the result would be warm gas. And he knew that the gas would stay warm and mixed rather than separating into two halves. But he wondered, what if we introduced a tiny demon who can sense each and every atom in the gas? This demon can turn around atoms, directing slow atoms to one side and fast to the other. As the temperature of a gas is a reflection of the average speed of its atoms, the demon could effectively separate the warm gas into two unequal halves, one hot and one cold. the demon seems to have broken the laws of thermodynamics. It has taken the disordered state, the warm gas, and created a more ordered state, hot and cold gas. And whilst this is only a thought experiment, arguments over the meaning of Maxwell's demon have raged for over 150 years. Some have stated that the demon must be expending energy to sort the gas atoms, and so total entropy will continue to rise. However, some have proposed that it is not energy that is important, but the fact that the demon uses information, namely the speeds of the atoms, to do the sorting. Linking energy, entropy, and information might seem a little strange, but over the last 3/4 of a century, this link has become stronger and stronger, and as any touch of a computer will tell you, processing information generates a lot of waste heat. But the situation is even more complex than that, for it is not simply the processing of information that leads to waste heat, but the forgetting. When we add 3 and 2, the answer is of course 5. But if I told you an answer was 5 and ask what two numbers are summed together, you cannot answer. In a similar way, inside a computer, logic gates combine electronic signals to do the addition. Whilst two numbers are fed in, they are forgotten as the single answer is spat out. The calculation is irreversible. The inputs lost to the universe. And in the action of forgetting, the logic gates heat up just a little.
I see everything.
In this way, thermodynamics provides us with the ultimate limit of forgetting. Called the Landauer limit, it is the inevitable release of energy from erasing a single bit of information, and at room temperature, it is just over 1/100th of an electron volt. Proven experimentally in 2012, scientists believe that at present, computer chips produce thousands of times more heat than this limit. But by 2035, they will most likely reach it. That tiny bit of waste heat inescapably increasing the entropy of the universe. Ultimately, across the cosmos, it is this irreversibility of calculations that drives entropy to increase. Forgetting information is therefore an essential ingredient for defining an arrow of time. Does this mean that for yesterday and tomorrow to have meaning, we must forget? Is the existence of the future implicitly tied to our inability to remember? And it is now we can return to our lonely civilization on the brink of universal heat death in the far distant future. When all useful energy is used up and entropy is at maximum, would time even have any meaning? And so, we have now reached a turning point. The foundations of modern time and space can only get us so far, and though they are useful, there is another revolution coming. A new order that will lead directly to the last days of our lonely black hole world. And as we continue in our journey, we are going to have to explore new time and new space. Within their black hole shell, many of the civilization resigned themselves to their fate and dozed their way to the end. But a few curious minds, with their dwindling energy, still wondered about the universe. Great books that had existed for almost an eternity told them how space could bend and curve. Central to these books was the story of light. They knew that light speed was immense and had used it to help measure their empire. They knew that light was a limit they could never break, no matter how hard they tried. And they knew that the speed of light had been the first step in the long journey to understanding how the universe really worked. When you are next out of doors on a summer night, turn your head towards the zenith. Almost vertically above you will be shining the brightest star of the northern skies, Vega of the Lyre, 26 years away at the speed of light. near enough to the point of no return for us short-lived creatures, for no man will ever turn homewards beyond Vega to greet again those he knew and loved on Earth. The speed of light has always been mysterious. Early experiments in flashing lights back and forth had shown that it must be much faster than sound. So, scientists wondered, was it infinite in speed? It was in 1676 that Danish astronomer Olli Rømer finally found the answer. Rømer was observing the moons of Jupiter as they circled the giant planet, and timing just when they entered the gas giant's planetary shadow. He had assumed that the orbits ticked like clockwork, and so would be able to predict just when the eclipses of the moons would begin and end. But as he observed the moon Io throughout the year, his predictions got steadily worse, and then better again. It became clear that the accuracy of his predictions depended upon our distance to Jupiter, and he would need to include the extra time taken by light, having to travel further. And so, with Rømer's data, fellow astronomer Christian Huygens calculated that light must move at more than 211,000 kilometers every second, not far off our modern estimate of about 300,000. Rømer's observation confirmed that light was fast and finite, but precisely what light was would have to wait for 2 centuries. For as well as the confusing implications of James Clerk Maxwell's demon, he is also famous for intertwining electricity and magnetism into a single idea: electromagnetism. Light, he found, was nothing more than a self-propagating combination of the two, and written into these equations was light's blistering speed. But there was still a problem. Just what was this speed relative to? Maxwell's equations gave no answers, so physicists began to search for a solution. Perhaps, they hypothesized, light traveled in an invisible medium, a mysterious ether permeating the entire cosmos. But that would also imply an ultimate state of rest in the universe, a worrying thought, as this would break Galileo's relativity. The problem was severe, so whilst one group of physicists set out to measure the properties of this supposed ether, others took the evidence in front of them and made an even larger leap. And chief among these was a young Albert Einstein. Einstein wondered why electricity and magnetism would not obey Galileo's relativity. Why should experiments specifically using the flow of electricity or spin of a magnet reveal absolute motion? In a bold step, he declared that they cannot. And with that, the special theory of relativity was born. On Galileo's ship, Einstein proposed all experiments would yield the same results, whether the ship was secured in port or smoothly sailing on a glassy sea. Throwing a ball would of course not reveal whether the ship was moving, but neither would measuring the speed of light. The speed of light in a vacuum was constant. This final statement seemed to fly in the face of the universe as laid out by Newton. In Newtonian mechanics, you could simply add speeds together, and each observer would measure differing speeds dependent on their own motion. But according to Einstein, this was not the case for light. Everyone would measure the same speed, whether the ship was stationary, going at 50 knots, or 50,000. However, if this was true, something else had to give, and the only freedom in the equations was the very nature of space and time themselves. For it to work, each observer must have their own measurement of space, and each observer must have their own measurement of time. With special relativity, it was the speed of light that was absolute, not space and time. Space and time were no longer the universal stage on which physics played out. And just as Maxwell had combined electricity and magnetism, space-time, too, was about to unite. Gentlemen, the views of space and time which I wish to lay before you, they are radical. Henceforth, space by itself and time by itself are doomed to fade away into mere shadows, and only a kind of union of the two will preserve an independent reality. In 1908, Hermann Minkowski, Einstein's former professor, came up with an idea. In reaction to the revelations of special relativity in 1905, he had decided to explore the geometry of these new equations. In Einstein's formulation, space was space and time was time, and to transform from one observer's viewpoint to another, you needed to mix the two together. But Minkowski pointed out that it was simpler to mix space and time together into space-time, and to transform one observer's space-time to another through geometry. And so, finally, combined space-time was born. This new melding of the three dimensions of space and one dimension of time has come to be known as Minkowski space, though Minkowski himself tragically died in 1909, before his idea had been fully embraced by the physics community. Newtonian space and time may have been completely upended, but Einstein was still not happy. Though his ideas had revolutionized our ideas of the universe, they could not account for gravity. Newton's gravitational equations needed the distance between masses, and special relativity now told us that no one could even agree on what these distances were. So Einstein went back to the drawing board and spent a decade thinking about gravity. What eventually emerged from these ruminations in 1915 was a solution that shocked physics to its core. Einstein had taken Minkowski's geometric picture of spacetime and made both space and time bendy and stretchy, the presence of mass and energy producing this curvature. Within this general theory, Einstein concluded that gravity, as a force, simply did not exist. The effects of gravity were encoded within the curvature of space and time. Newton's picture of space and time was well and truly dead, for not only were space and time relative, they were flexible as well. The consequences of Einstein's vision of relativity were quickly uncovered. In the special theory, the relative ticks of clocks depended on motion, and whilst everyone feels time passing at 1 second per second, different clocks will tick off different amounts of time. But with the coming of the general theory, time was shaken even more, as where you are also influences the tick of your clock. The presence of mass curves space and curves time, and so gravity can dictate the relative ticking of a clock. The following year, in 1916, Carl Schwarzschild solved the field equations of relativity for a spherical mass, and written inside his equations was a completely collapsed mass, squeezed into a point. Whilst it didn't get its name for another 50 years, Schwarzschild had the mathematics for a black hole. His solution showed that black holes bend both space and time, and with this intense curvature comes intense gravitational pulls, not even light able to escape. In the vicinity of a black hole, where gravitational fields are immense, time becomes more and more curved as you get closer to the center. Compared to clocks in the distant universe, near the heart of darkness, time ticks very slowly. And it wasn't just black holes that sprung from the new equations. In the centuries since Einstein's gravitational insights, many more bizarre solutions have been found. Throughout the relativistic literature, there are wormholes, warp drives, and even entire curved universes, all built from the malleable nature of space and time. In 1919, observations of the deflection of starlight proved his theory and made Einstein a superstar, and so scientists turned their attention to measuring the effects of general relativity to further cement the concept. One of the weirdest of these experiments was undertaken by Joseph Haffel and Richard Keating in 1971. Their equipment was a series of very accurate cesium clocks and a set of jet plane journeys that completely encircled the Earth. To begin the experiment, all the clocks were placed in the same location and synchronized. Some of the clocks then headed off on a plane, some heading to the east and others to the west, some moving with the Earth's rotation, others against it. $7,600 was spent on flights, with 2 seats on each plane, going to Mr. Clock. And because they were flying, they were in a different gravitational field to the clocks left behind. After they had circled the world twice, they were all brought together. If the universe was governed by Newton's absolute time, they should all have remained in sync. But if Einstein was correct, relative motions and space-time curvature should have desynced them. The experiment was run, and the clocks were reunited. They differed by a few hundred nanoseconds. Einstein was declared the winner. But there is one more test of relativity that has proven to be the most spectacular. In developing relativity, Einstein found stretchy space-time can also wobble and ring. Just as Maxwell found that electricity and magnetism could ripple, so could gravity. But Einstein couldn't decide if his mathematics were correct or if he was fooling himself, and struggled to conclude whether these gravitational waves were a part of reality. In 1974, Russell Hulse was a young astronomy student who made a spectacular discovery. With his supervisor, Joseph Taylor, whilst peering into the universe with the 300-meter Arecibo telescope, he found a pulsar, the rapidly spinning dead heart of a star. This pulsar, PSR B1913 plus 16, was spinning 17 times a second, and was not on its own, but orbited another dead star heart, a neutron star. And with the regular beats of the pulsar, they were able to accurately chart the cosmic dance. What they found, however, was quite unexpected. With Newtonian gravity, these dead stars should orbit each other for eternity. But Taylor and Hulse found that the orbits were shrinking, and the stars were slowly but steadily being drawn together. Somehow, the energy of their orbits was leaking out into the universe. And it was then Taylor and Hulse realized Einstein's gravitational waves were an ideal culprit. They delved into the mathematics of general relativity and calculated how the orbiting stars formed ripples in space-time, showing how they could carry away precisely enough energy to explain the orbital demise. In 1993, Taylor and Hulse received the Nobel Prize for their discovery, and 24 years later, the prize was awarded for the direct detection of gravitational waves. That experiment was the Laser Interferometer Gravitational Wave Observatory, or simply LIGO for short, which, with unimagined sensitivity, can feel the tiny ripples of space-time. LIGO has opened a new and exciting window on the universe. They are uncovering merging black holes and the collisions between neutron stars. And now, astronomers even plan to hunt for the oldest gravitational waves, formed in the birth of the universe. And so, in this new world ushered in by Einstein, it is clear that the entire cosmos is written in the language of gravity, of curved and warped space and time. But there was one more secret to uncover, hidden in the equations. First realized by Alexander Friedmann in 1922 and later proved by Edwin Hubble, the expansion of the universe is the expansion of space, expanding from a single point 13.8 billion years ago, known today as the Big Bang. Put very simply, there was less space yesterday, and there will be more space tomorrow. Every galaxy has been found to be moving further and further away from us, bar our local group, at an average rate of 70 kilometers a second per megaparsec, which actually means that at the moment, for every 3.26 million light-years distance away from us a galaxy is, it is moving away from us at an extra 70 kilometers a second. So, a galaxy 326 million light-years from us is moving at 7,000 kilometers a second. And a galaxy 32.6 billion light-years away, it recedes from us faster than the speed of light. This may seem bizarre after everything we have learnt up until this point, but the universe's speed limit only applies to objects moving through space, and these galaxies are not moving through space away from us. Space is simply growing between us. This expanding universe makes curving and bending space-time even more complicated to understand. As equations show that space is infinite, what is actually happening is that the universe is becoming less dense. And clearly, this decrease in density is not completely uniform across the cosmos. You, for example, are not slowly drifting apart. Individual galaxies too hold themselves together due to their mutual gravity. But as this gravity is a manifestation of the curvature of space, what happens at the boundary between expanding and non-expanding space? And that is not the only problem, as expanding space makes the form of yesterday's space-time different to tomorrow's space-time, thus breaking what was thought to be one of the key properties of the universe: conservation of energy. The importance of symmetry in physics was laid out in detail by mathematician Emmy Noether. In this case, a symmetry meaning that when you change your situation, the physics remains the same. Changing location doesn't change physics, meaning momentum is conserved. And the fact that physics is the same today and tomorrow gives energy conservation. But in an expanding universe, where space-time is changing, this symmetry is shattered. As space grows, it doesn't stretch. It doesn't dilute. There is just more of it. But as photons travel across an expanding universe, they are stretched and they lose energy. And galaxies are robbed of their speed as their motion grinds to a halt. In this way, energy is simply not conserved as the cosmos grows. A conundrum that causes problems for physicists to this day. And so, it may now seem that space has finally become physical, real. After all, it can bend, expand, curve, and ripple. But there is a final twist, one final rug to be pulled out from beneath us. And this can be summed up in the words of the Nobel Prize winner, Steven Weinberg. How is it possible for space, which is utterly empty, to expand? How can nothing expand? The answer is space does not expand. Cosmologists sometimes talk about expanding space, but they should know better. To the novice, this statement must seem almost bizarre. How can a leading scientist make such a claim? Well, because he is absolutely correct. In Einstein's relativity, space-time is truly nothing. The mathematics look like bending and curving, but in reality, relativity tells us space is nothing and has no properties. But what of time in this new picture? Just how were seconds, minutes, and hours affected by the dawn of relativity? To the future civilization, time meant many things. They knew that their time was unique, unshared by any others. They understood that clocks ticked differently depending on where you were and what you were doing. Their engineers had used this malleable nature of space-time in shaping their civilization. Great portals of distorted time and space permitted travel across the empire, whilst the slow ticks near the gravitational pull of a black hole had been used to stretch time and allow them to watch the end of everything. People like us that believe in physics know that the distinction between past, present, and future is only a stubbornly persistent illusion. With the coming of Einstein's general relativity, physicists were presented with a new headache. They knew that every particle in the universe had a past, present, and future, and like a line drawn on a map, they could chart the journey of a particle through the 4 dimensions of space and time, tracing out its individual world line from the past to the future through a series of nows. Each particle in your body, each electron and quark, journeys on its own world line. Before you were conceived, the world lines were dispersed, but as you grew, many world lines condensed into a bundle, which is you. And when you are gone, these world lines will again scatter. For a fleeting moment in the life of the universe, you exist as little more than a collection of world lines, a brief knot in the fabric of eternity. Whilst unsettling, this appears to make sense. So where is the headache? Firstly, we have to remember what the relativity of time really means. With no absolute time, there is no uniform cosmic clock. And this means that there is no such thing as a unique present, a true instant of now. Without an absolute definition of a cosmic now, just how do we define a unique notion of the past? Just where does the future begin? And so, headache. Within the equations of relativity, all pasts, presents, and futures are already written. The entire history of all things is already out there, somewhere. This notion, known as the block universe, has bothered many physicists and philosophers, as without a now, the cosmos simply cannot unfold from moment to moment. All we can do as we trace out our world line is follow our predefined path, and concepts dear to us, such as free will, are lost. But this cannot be correct. We clearly remember the past, and the future is a mysterious door that is yet to be opened. They are clearly different. Or are they? Consider two electrons hurtling towards each other. Both carry an identical negative charge, and through electromagnetism, they repel. As they get closer, the repulsion grows and their motion gradually slows, stops, and reverses. Eventually, the electrons hurtle away from each other, back the way they came. There seems nothing strange about this. But imagine we filmed the interaction between the two electrons, and then showed the film to an audience of physicists, playing a mirrored version. The left switched to right, and vice